So, picture this. I'm standing in my own driveway at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday night, wrists in handcuffs after a 14-hour shift in 118-degree heat, while my neighbor Brenda Kensington films the whole thing on her phone like she's breaking the case of the century. 3 police cruisers, lights flashing, turning my quiet street into something out of a TV drama. The entire HOA board was lined up on my lawn like I'd just made the evening news for all the wrong reasons. My work truck was still running, air conditioner blasting. I had literally just pulled in from an emergency call fixing a family's AC during a Phoenix heat wave. And there's Brenda, practically glowing with satisfaction, waving a stack of official-looking papers at the deputy, insisting I'm some rule-breaking menace who owes thousands in unpaid HOA fines. The cuffs bit into my wrists while the scent of hot asphalt and diesel fumes hung in the air. Here's the twist. Those unpaid bills she was bragging about? Every single one had her name printed on the originals. So here's my question. What would you have done if your neighbor tried to have you arrested over their own unpaid bills? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, because this story takes a wild turn. Let's rewind so you can see exactly how this whole mess began and how far Brenda was willing to go. My name's Marcus Thorne, I'm 34, and I fix air conditioners for a living in the oven that Arizona calls summer. After my divorce and a financial hit that left me rebuilding from scratch, I scraped together a down payment on a modest ranch house in Willowbrook Estates just outside Tucson. Nothing fancy, 1990s subdivision, beige stucco, gravel yards instead of grass, and neighbors whose idea of excitement is trying a new yogurt flavor. The HOA formed in 2018 to prevent people from turning their yards into scrap piles. Then came Brenda Kensington, 59 years old, moved in 6 months after me from a high-end Scottsdale neighborhood where even the golf carts probably cost more than my truck. Rumor had it her husband's import business went under, bringing them here, a place she clearly thought was beneath her. She had a bleached blonde bob that probably needed its own maintenance budget, oversized designer sunglasses, real or not, I'll let you guess, and a constant expression like something smelled bad. She drove a silver Mercedes C-Class that screamed, "I still matter," while probably costing her sleepless nights over the payments. Meanwhile, I'm in my white Ford work van, tools rattling like a rock tumbler every time I hit a pothole. That first morning in my new place should have tipped me off. I'd worked until midnight getting a family's AC running during a heat wave, then parked my van in my own driveway. Next morning, citation under the windshield, flapping in the dry desert breeze. $75 for commercial vehicle. Storage violation. Official letterhead, legal tone, the whole package. But here's the thing. I read the fine print. I called the property management company. Sandra, the office manager, went quiet when I read her the citation number. "Sir, we haven't issued any violations this week, and our bylaws don't mention commercial vehicles. Rule of thumb, always check the original HOA governing documents before paying a fine." I dug out my paperwork and found 0 rules about work trucks or anything related to my job. That's when it hit me. Brenda had faked the citation. She was targeting new residents or anyone who looked like they wouldn't fight back. I stood there in my driveway, the smell of motor oil still on my shirt, realizing my quiet post-divorce life had just been hijacked by a wannabe HOA enforcer. And this wasn't just about me. If she was willing to forge paperwork for one neighbor, how many others had already paid fake fines just to avoid trouble? 3 days later, Brenda made her first big move. I got home from a service call around 7 p.m. to find a folded paper taped right to my front door. Emergency HOA board meeting Thursday, 7 p.m. regarding Marcus Thorne violations. I'd been living there 3 months, and the most dramatic thing before this was Mrs. Patterson's cat getting stuck in a palm tree. The meeting was in the community center, which smelled like a mix of industrial cleaner and broken dreams. The fluorescent lights buzzed like angry wasps. I expected maybe 5 board members. Instead, it looked like a full-blown tribunal. Brenda was there with a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet. Jerry Walsh, the board president, called the meeting to order while Brenda practically bounced in her seat. "He's been parking that commercial vehicle for weeks and coming home at all hours," she announced. She started pulling papers from her folder, violation notices, complaint forms, even a petition with some questionable signatures. "Now here's something I learned during my divorce. Always demand the original documentation." So while Brenda put on her one-woman show, I was taking time-stamped photos of every document she held up. "Before we continue," I said, standing with my own folder, much thinner, but a lot more official, "I'd like to see the specific bylaw that defines aesthetic standards for commercial vehicles." Silence. You could hear Jerry's stomach growl. He'd clearly skipped dinner for this circus. He started flipping through his HOA rulebook, looking more puzzled with every page. "Well, there's a general clause about maintaining property values." "What exactly about work trucks?" More silence. The AC kicked on with a wheeze that made me want to hand it my business card. That's when I showed them the photos I'd taken earlier of Brenda's own property. Cracked driveway like a desert canyon map, dead plants still wearing their Home Depot price tags, and my favorite, a crooked mailbox that looked like it survived a minor earthquake. "Since we're talking about aesthetic standards," I said, "maybe we start with actual violations before inventing new ones." Brenda's face went through more shades than a paint sample fan. "That's completely different. This is about your aggressive behavior." "Ma'am," Jerry cut in, and you could see the light bulb finally flickering in his head. "Do you have any documentation showing Mr. Thorne violated a specific bylaw?" That's when Doris dropped the truth bomb. Turns out she'd been taking notes when Brenda came to recruit her. When Jerry asked about my so-called intimidating behavior, Doris looked like she wanted to vanish under the folding table. "I just signed what she asked because she seemed upset," she said quietly. "But he's always polite. She told me he was probably involved in something shady, but I've never seen anything. I think she just doesn't like working folks." The room felt 20-degree cooler. Brenda opened and closed her mouth like a fish. The meeting unraveled faster than a bargain umbrella in a storm. Jerry called a recess. The board huddled, then returned looking miserable. "Due to procedural issues, we're tabling this matter for review." But Brenda wasn't done. As people left, she cornered Jerry and suggested a $25 monthly monitoring fee on my property until I proved compliance. $25 isn't much, but it was the principle. She wanted to charge me for existing. Walking back to my truck, I caught the scent of desert sage mixing with industrial cleaner from the community center. Doris hurried after me, shoes crunching on gravel. "I'm sorry about this," she said. "She made it sound like you were trouble. She's got an issue with people who work with their hands." That's when I knew. One meeting wouldn't end this. 2 weeks later, Brenda escalated. I'm under the hood of my truck one Saturday, replacing a squeaky belt, when a White County pickup pulls up. Out steps a man in a polo with a clipboard. Never a good sign. "Marcus Thorne?" "That's me," I say. "I'm Inspector Davidson, Maricopa County Code Enforcement. We got a complaint you're running an unlicensed commercial business from this home." The Arizona heat mixed with motor oil in the air as I asked, "What kind of business?" He read from his notes. "Unlicensed HVAC operation, commercial equipment storage, customer vehicles, excessive noise, and possible hazardous materials." I looked around at my quiet driveway. Where exactly are these vehicles and hazardous materials? That's what I'm here to find out. He walked my property for 30 minutes. Empty garage, no customer cars, no hazardous anything. His confusion was obvious. "So you don't run a repair business here?" "Unless fixing my own sanity counts, no. Here's a tip from my divorce. Days. Government inspectors hate bogus complaints." By the end, Davidson looked more annoyed with Brenda than with me. "Mr. Thorne," he said, snapping his clipboard shut, "there's no evidence of commercial activity here. Filing false reports is a misdemeanor. Someone's wasting taxpayer money. He promised to flag future complaints against my address as likely frivolous. That's when I realized Brenda had just made a critical... That's when it hit me. Brenda had made a critical error. She'd escalated to government agencies, which meant there was now an official paper trail of her behavior. That afternoon, I launched my own investigation. Thanks to the very expensive lessons from my divorce, I knew the value of documentation. I took a walk through the neighborhood with my phone camera ready, noting property conditions and asking people about their own Brenda run-ins. What I found would have made a fraud investigator grin from ear to ear. Janet Muller, 2 streets over, showed me a $150 violation Brenda had given her for unauthorized landscaping. Janet's offense, growing tomatoes in her backyard. The citation looked official, complete with case numbers and legal-style wording, but it was fake. Bob Richardson got slapped with a $200 fine for replacing his warped front door with the same model. Brenda called it an architectural modification without board approval. Bob, a retired accountant, knew the HOA rules, inside and out, and knew it was nonsense, but the paperwork was convincing enough to alarm his wife. Then came the real breakthrough. I met Lisa Santos, a single mom new to the neighborhood. She had actually paid one of Brenda's fines. Paid it how? I asked. She'd mailed a $75 check to an address Brenda gave her, a P.O. box for HOA violation processing. The wind kicked up, scattering dust and rustling palm fronds like playing cards. That's when it all clicked. This wasn't just harassment. This was fraud. Brenda was taking real money for fake violations and keeping it. Right then, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Your employer has been contacted about your illegal business. Stop bothering senior residents or there will be consequences. I glanced toward Brenda's house 3 doors down. Her silver Mercedes sat in the driveway, and I swear a curtain twitched in the front window. That was all the proof I needed. She'd escalated to threats. The next Monday at 6:47 a.m., I was loading my truck when 2 police cruisers pulled up like I was some criminal mastermind instead of a guy who fixes air conditioners. Officer Martinez stepped out, looking less than thrilled to be here. His partner kept a cautious eye on me. Marcus Thorne? That's me, I said, setting down my toolbox. We need you to come downtown for questioning about a criminal threat incident from last night. Criminal threats? Last night I was home in my shorts, eating leftover Chinese and watching a penguin documentary. Unless changing the TV channel was a felony, I was clueless. What kind of threats? Martinez flipped through his notebook. Miss Kensington says you came onto her property at 8 p.m., threatened her, and acted in a way consistent with stalking. The warm morning air smelled of creosote and car exhaust as I tried to figure out how I could be in 2 places at once, because at 8 p.m., I was 40 miles away replacing a heat pump. Here's the thing about HVAC work. Every call is GPS tracked, time-stamped, and signed off by the customer. I had the receipts. Literally. 25 minutes later, I was in interview room B at the sheriff's office, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Martinez laid out my work orders, GPS logs, and signed service forms. According to these, he said, you were nowhere near Willowbrook Estates. You've got a customer's signature confirming you were still at their house at 9:20 p.m. That's correct, I replied. Martinez leaned back. This isn't the first complaint from Ms. Kensington, is it? That's when I told him everything. The fake violations, the bogus county complaint, the threats. His attitude shifted from skeptical to engaged. Here's what's going to happen, he said, closing his notebook. No charges. It's impossible to threaten someone when you're miles away with proof. But Mr. Thorne, this is the 4th complaint from her in 6 weeks. We're starting to see a pattern. When I got home, Janet Muller waved me over before I could park. She'd gathered a small crowd in her driveway. Apparently half the street had Brenda stories. Bob Richardson, the accountant, had been busy. "I've tracked every fake violation she's issued over 18 months, he said, holding a document like it was gold. 14 households, 47 violations, attempted collections totaling $3,400. Then Lisa Santos produced something that made my divorce lawyer's voice echo in my head. Always follow the money. She showed her canceled check and the payment instructions. The check wasn't made out to the HOA or the management company. It was payable to Community Standards, Processing LLC, and mailed to a P.O. box registered to, you guessed it, B. Kensington. She made a fake company, Bob said, practically vibrating with excitement. That's not just harassment, that's mail fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. The sprinklers clicked on across the street, as we all realized we'd uncovered something serious. Then my phone buzzed again, an unknown number this time reading, "You're playing with fire. Drop this investigation or you'll regret it." I held up the phone so everyone could see the message. And now we can add witness intimidation to the list. That evening, Detective Rodriguez from Financial Crimes called me directly. Turns out when you file false police reports while quietly running a fraudulent mail scheme, you end up on the radar of people with badges and zero tolerance for games. "Bring everything you've got tomorrow," Rodriguez said. "Every fake violation, every payment record, every threatening message. We're opening a formal investigation." As the desert sunset washed my kitchen windows in gold and crimson, I sat at my table sorting through evidence that might very well put Brenda behind bars. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her own greed and intimidation had built a case stronger than anything I could have orchestrated. Somewhere in the distance, air conditioning units hummed, keeping homes comfortable in the blistering heat. The sound of real work. Tomorrow, Brenda Kensington was going to find out what real consequences looked like. Wednesday afternoon, Detective Rodriguez's office smelled faintly of burnt coffee, and justice ready to roll. Bob Richardson sat across from the desk, laptop open, looking like a forensic accountant who'd struck gold. "Gentlemen," Rodriguez said, spreading our evidence across his desk like a general laying out a battle plan. "What you've uncovered here is much bigger than neighborhood squabbles. This is organized fraud, the kind that gets federal attention." Bob's fingers tapped across his keyboard, pulling up a spreadsheet fit to make the FBI's white-collar crime unit weep. "I've traced every bogus payment over 14 months. 7 residents paid fake fines totaling $3,200, all funneled into accounts controlled by Brenda Kensington." Rodriguez nodded but looked like he was saving the real shocker. "That's just the surface." He dropped a thick folder on his desk with a thud that made the moment feel heavier. "I ran a background check on your neighbor. Her financial situation? Let's just say it's not seaworthy." The sunlight slanted through the blinds, stretching long shadows across the floor, underscoring the weight of what was coming. Outside, traffic murmured under the constant hum of the building's AC, a reminder that even during serious business, someone's always keeping the air cool. "Her husband's import business didn't just fail," Rodriguez continued. "It imploded. $340,000 owed to creditors. Mortgage 4 months behind. Mercedes lease in default. Credit cards maxed at $52,000. She's been using your fake HOA fines to make minimum payments and keep repossession crews at bay." But then came the twist that made my divorce battles feel like a kid's birthday party. "She's been running this same scam for over 3 years, Rodriguez said, sliding out police reports from Scottsdale. "Same fake violations, same fraudulent collections, same targeting of working-class residents who might not push back." Bob's eyes widened. "She's done this before." "It gets better," Rodriguez said. "Scottsdale PD was building a case in 2022 when she conveniently vanished, only to reappear here and start over." He leaned forward. "Here's the kicker, the piece that's going to end this for good. From the folder, he produced a photograph that made my stomach tighten. It showed Brenda's hands holding a USPS master key, the kind that opens entire community mailbox clusters. She's been intercepting real HOA communications and replacing them with her counterfeits. We're talking mail theft, identity, theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy across state lines. The room went quiet except for the buzz of fluorescent lights and the faint rumble of Phoenix traffic. My pulse thudded in my ears as the scale of it all landed. How much money total? I asked. Rodriguez checked his notes. Between Scottsdale and here, a conservative $15,000 over 3 years. But the federal charges carry up to 20 years because she crossed state lines and used the postal system to commit fraud. Bob closed, his laptop with a click that sounded final. So, what now? Now? Rodriguez smiled for the first time since we'd met. Now I get arrest warrants and shut down a multi-year criminal enterprise hiding behind neighborhood politics. Walking out of that station felt like stepping into another reality. For months, Brenda had made me second-guess myself, wondering if I was just overreacting. Turns out I'd been up against a calculated criminal operation. Bob and I stood in the shimmering heat of the parking lot. "You realize what this means?" he asked. "That justice is about to be served with a side of federal prison time," I said. "Better than that," Bob grinned. "Brenda Kensington just went from neighborhood bully to federal defendant, and she has no idea what's coming." My phone buzzed again, another anonymous threat. This time, I laughed out loud. "Too little, too late, Brenda." Too late. Friday evening, Janet Muller's dining room could have passed for a federal field office in the middle of suburban Arizona. Her antique oak table had been transformed into a full-scale mission hub for what Detective Rodriguez enthusiastically called taking down a multi-year fraud operation, which honestly sounded a lot cooler than getting even with the nightmare neighbor. The air carried a mix of fresh coffee, Janet's vanilla candles, and the faint tension of Bob Richardson's stress sweat as he hovered over his laptop like an accountant who had just discovered the jackpot. "All right, team," Rodriguez said, settling into one of Janet's floral chairs and spreading out enough files to intimidate a small nation. "Federal prosecutors want this case airtight before we move in. That means every shred of evidence gets cataloged, cross-checked, and organized like we're building a case against Al Capone." Bob proudly unveiled what he dubbed the Brenda Prosecution Package, a color-coded file system worthy of the Library of Congress. Green folders held fraudulent violations, red contained threatening communications, blue for financial crimes, and yellow for what he half-jokingly called aggravated suburban terrorism. Here's something most people don't realize about federal fraud cases. Prosecutors love it when the accused basically builds the evidence themselves. Brenda's obsessive record-keeping of her own wrongdoing was about to make the FBI's job incredibly easy. "Janet," Rodriguez continued, "you're our community witness coordinator. I need signed statements from every victim, every neighbor who saw intimidation, and anyone who can describe her patterns of behavior." Janet nodded, already working through a victim list that read like a suburban horror anthology. 12 households with fake violations, 6 with direct threats, and 3 who'd seen mail tampering firsthand. Detective Sarah Olivia from the White Collar Crime Unit had joined our neighborhood task force, bringing federal authority and the kind of enthusiasm that suggested she took personal joy in locking up con artists. "Cases like this are gold," Olivia said, reviewing Bob's spreadsheets with satisfaction. "Clear intent, documented pattern, multiple victims across state lines. It's what we call a career ender." She spread out a neighborhood map, pinning each targeted home in different colors. The pattern was damning. Brenda had zeroed in on newer residents, single parents, seniors, and anyone likely to pay a bogus fine rather than fight it. Lisa Santos, still clutching her canceled check like a trophy of survival, raised her hand. "What about people who already paid her?" "Restitution," Rodriguez answered. We freeze her accounts, seize what she's got, and victims get their money back, with interest. The desert wind rattled Janet's windows while Bob's calculator clicked away. Outside, the usual suburban soundtrack carried on, kids playing, lawnmowers humming, and air conditioners battling the heat. Rodriguez pulled out his phone and showed photos from a fresh search warrant, letterhead templates, fake company stamps, unauthorized post office keys, and financial ledgers tracking her activities across 2 counties. How much in total? I asked. About 18 grand over 3 years, Rodriguez said, plus possible tax evasion. Chen, our legal bulldog, opened her briefcase to reveal documents thick enough to be doorstops. Wire fraud, 20 years max. Mail fraud, another 20. Identity theft adds mandatory minimums. We're talking decades. Timing, I'd learned from divorce court, was everything. The feds might move slowly, but when they act, it's with freight train force. Arrest is Monday, 6 a.m., Rodriguez said. Federal team, local backup, media coverage for public awareness. Media? Janet asked, wide-eyed. HOA fraud. Hits thousands of homeowners a year, Olivia replied. This could stop future scams. As we boxed up the last files, Rodriguez handed us business cards. Stay alert. People do desperate things when they know it's over. Bob shut his laptop with the satisfied snap of a man who just built an airtight case. The best part? She was so focused on harassing us, she never realized we were tracking her every move. Walking to my truck under the cooling desert sky, I felt a rare mix of relief and anticipation. My phone buzzed, another anonymous threat. This time, I just forwarded it to Rodriguez with a grin. Monday morning, Brenda Kensington would learn that karma doesn't just knock. Sometimes it shows up with a search warrant. Saturday morning started quietly. I was in the garage sorting tools, enjoying the brief cool before Arizona's heat wave set in when Janet called. Marcus, you need to see this. 20 minutes later, I stood in her driveway, staring at the aftermath of what looked like a vandal's twisted masterpiece. Egg splattered across her house, liar spray-painted in neon orange across her garage door, and trash scattered like some kind of cruel confetti. Got it on camera, Janet said, holding up her phone. The footage showed a figure in dark clothes and a baseball cap. Methodically vandalizing Janet's property around 3 a.m., the figure on her security footage moved with the precision of someone who'd done this before, careful not to show their face, but oblivious to the fact that the silver Mercedes, parked half a block away, was basically a neon billboard screaming Brenda Kensington was here. She's escalating, I said, snapping photos of the damage. Cornered animals get desperate. But Brenda wasn't done. Not even close. An hour later, Bob Richardson called. And for a man who spent his life making spreadsheets sound exciting, his voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. Someone just called my old firm, he said. Claimed I was embezzling client funds and told them to look into my pension payments. Lisa Santos was next. Anonymous complaints to Child Protective Services accused her of drug use and neglecting her 8-year-old son. CPS knocked on her door that afternoon, legally required to investigate. They were actually apologetic, Lisa told us during an emergency meeting at my house that evening. Said they get bogus calls all the time, but it still took 3 hours to clear. The pattern was crystal clear. Brenda had moved beyond fake HOA violations into full-scale character assassination, weaponizing government agencies against anyone who stood in her way. Here's where her unraveling started working against her. My divorce lawyer once told me, when people panic, they make mistakes. Big, trackable, prosecutable mistakes. Sunday morning, I was on my patio with coffee, planning a quiet day before Monday's arrest, when my phone lit up like a pinball machine. Brenda had created fake social media profiles and flooded every local Facebook group with an expose of our supposed criminal conspiracy, complete with accusations of insurance fraud, elder intimidation, and for some reason, drug trafficking. It would have been hilarious if it hadn't included our addresses, work schedules, and family details, which officially crossed the line into stalking. She's building the prosecution's case for them, Bob observed when we gathered again at Janet's house, her garage now primed over the neon spray paint. Detective Rodriguez arrived with a folder thick enough to hold a phone book. "Your neighbor had a busy weekend," he said. "False reports to 4 agencies, vandalism, cyberstalking, attempted witness intimidation." "Attempted?" Janet asked. "She offered Doris Fleming $500 to recant her statement about being pressured into filing false complaints," Rodriguez said. "Yes, she tried to pay someone to lie about being forced to lie. It's impressively stupid." And there was more. Brenda had even called his captain, alleging police corruption and demanding the case be moved to internal affairs. "Did it work?" I asked. Rodriguez's grin was pure satisfaction. "No. My captain sent it to the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. They're very eager to meet her tomorrow morning." That evening, under a desert sky streaked orange and purple, we sat on my patio, air conditioners humming, kids laughing in the distance, reminded exactly what we were fighting for: the right to live in peace without being terrorized by one neighbor's personal crime wave. "You know what's ironic?" Janet said, sipping her iced tea. "If she'd stopped after the first fake violation, none of this would have happened." "Sociopaths can't help themselves," Bob replied. "They always escalate until someone stops them." My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You people destroyed my life. Tomorrow you'll learn what real consequences look like." Rodriguez shook his head. "She just needs to make it 24 hours without committing another felony." As if on cue, sirens wailed in the distance, heading toward Brenda's street. "Think that's related?" Janet asked. "With our luck?" I grabbed my keys. "Probably." 20 minutes later, we stood across from the HOA president's house, watching officers arrest Brenda for attempting to break in, allegedly searching for evidence of our conspiracy. "She made it 23 hours and 47 minutes, Rodriguez noted dryly. "Close enough. I thought that was the finale. I was wrong. Sunday night, 11:47 p.m. I'm half asleep when blue and red lights explode across my bedroom. 3 squad cars in my driveway. Officer Martinez looked like he'd rather be getting a root canal without anesthesia." "Let me guess," I said. He glanced at his notes. "Anonymous 911 call. Reports of gunfire, domestic violence, and what?" The caller described as screams consistent with torture or murder. I gestured to my perfectly quiet cul-de-sac, where the only sound was the wind in the palm trees. "The most violent thing here tonight was me fighting with a fitted sheet." Martinez spent 15 minutes checking the property, then closed his notepad with a snap. "9th bogus call in 12 days, all from the same person. At this point, we're talking criminal misuse of emergency services, filing false reports, maybe even felony charges for endangering public safety." And just like that, Brenda had managed to add yet another charge to Monday morning's arrest. Vanishing into the darkness, leaving behind nothing but the stink of exhaust and the sour taste of trouble, I dialed Rodriguez. It was past midnight, yet he answered before the second ring. "She called in a mass shooting," I told him. "No," he said. "Dispatch called me directly. We're serving the arrest warrant tonight." "Tonight? I thought you were waiting until morning." "Marcus, she's crossed from fraud into abusing emergency services. The next step is real violence. We're not taking that risk." At 2:23 a.m., I peered through my living room blinds as what looked like a small army of federal agents surrounded Brenda's house. No sirens. No movie-style chaos, just calm, efficient professionals moving with precision. The arrest was almost underwhelming in its lack of drama, until Brenda appeared in a leopard print bathrobe that had seen better decades, shouting about police state tactics and constitutional violations as they loaded her into an unmarked sedan. Her voice echoed across the desert like a coyote with an existential crisis. But the real twist was still ahead. By Monday morning, while processing her home, agents uncovered something that took our neighborhood feud to a whole new level. In her bedroom closet, 3 laptops, dozens of fake IDs, and what Detective Olivia later described as the most extensive fraud operation I've ever seen outside organized crime. She wasn't just running HOA scams, Olivia explained during an emergency briefing that felt like a Netflix crime special. She was operating coordinated fraud rings in retirement communities across Nevada, New Mexico, and California. Bob Richardson, gripping his calculator like a lifeline, looked up from his spreadsheet. How many victims? 47 confirmed. 4 states. About $127,000 stolen over 6 years. The room went silent, save for the low hum of the air conditioner battling the Arizona heat and Janet's gasp of disbelief. We'd gone from sparring with a petty neighbor to being key witnesses in a full-scale federal racketeering case. The best part, Olivia said with clear satisfaction, is that she documented everything, every fake violation, every phony fine, every threat. She basically built the prosecution's case herself. That afternoon, Brenda's initial court appearance was streamed via grainy courthouse video. The woman who once flaunted designer handbags was now wearing orange scrubs, with the dawning realization that her luck had run out. The judge reviewed the charges: wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, criminal conspiracy, interstate transportation of stolen property, and denied bail without hesitation. Flight risk, clear pattern of sophisticated crime across state lines, he ruled. Her court-appointed lawyer looked like he wished he were defending parking tickets. When I stepped out of the courthouse into the blazing Arizona sun, reporters were waiting to interview me about HOA fraud prevention. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt pure vindication. My phone buzzed. A text from Rodriguez, preliminary plea deal, 12 to 15 years in federal prison. Justice served. Glanced at the desert sky. Storm clouds rolling in for a rare afternoon shower, and laughed out loud. Brenda had finally picked a fight she couldn't win, with the federal government. The next evening, 7 sharp, the Willowbrook Estates Community Center was packed wall to wall. I'd expected maybe 20 neighbors. Instead, half of Phoenix seemed to be there. The place smelled of industrial coffee, nervous sweat, and the electric charge of an audience about to see justice unfold. Detective Rodriguez sat at the head table, flanked by FBI agent Olivia and our visibly nervous property management rep. His stack of evidence folders was thick enough to stop a bullet. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez began, his voice booming like a ring announcer, "we're here tonight to discuss the resolution of a federal investigation that began right here in your neighborhood." That's when the doors swung open like a courtroom drama. Brenda Kensington herself walked in, on emergency bail pending appeal, trailed by a private lawyer she'd somehow hired with mystery money. She wore a designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, hair perfect, makeup flawless, expression defiant. "My client," the lawyer declared, "is here tonight to set the record straight about false accusations and police misconduct." You could feel the collective intake of breath from 200 people who had waited months to watch this moment. Rodriguez rose slowly, and I swear the room temperature dropped 10 degrees. "Miss Kensington," he said, "you're welcome to speak. But you should know, federal prosecutors have accepted your guilty plea on 12 counts of wire fraud, 8 counts of mail fraud. Fraud. Conspiracy to commit interstate fraud. The charges landed on the crowd like a punch to the gut. Guilty plea, federal indictment, multi-state fraud, conspiracy." Brenda's expression shifted through colors faster than a glitching mood ring. "That's not... there were special circumstances." "Ma'am," Rodriguez cut in, pulling out a stack of papers thick enough to rival a phone book. "Shall I read the list of charges you admitted to yesterday in federal court?" Agent Olivia rose from her seat, and when FBI agents stand in public meetings, silence follows. "For everyone's clarity," she announced, Ms. Kensington's crimes include defrauding 47 victims in 4 states, stealing over $127,000 through fake HOA violations, identity theft, mail fraud, and intimidating witnesses. The room exploded. Residents Brenda had harassed with her bogus fines shouted over each other. News cameras swung toward the chaos. Somewhere in the noise, Brenda's voice rose higher, insisting on her innocence. "This is a witch hunt. They're all against me. I was only upholding neighborhood standards." Bob Richardson stood up, gripping his laptop like it was a weapon, loaded with spreadsheets. "Neighborhood standards?" he said, his accountant's voice cutting through the noise. "You stole $3,200 from our block alone, fabricated 47 violations, and filed 17 false police reports." Janet Mueller stepped forward with a folder stuffed with victim statements. "You terrorized 12 families, made Lisa Santos too scared to let her son play outside, and bullied seniors into thinking they were criminals for planting tomatoes." Then came the moment we'd all waited for, the mic drop. I stood from the back, and the crowd's sudden hush told me it was my cue. "Brenda, you spent months trying to convince everyone I was the problem, that I was disrupting harmony, intimidating seniors, and hurting property values." She turned to face me, and for the first time in this whole ordeal, I saw fear flicker in her eyes. "But you know what the real problem was?" My voice carried across the packed room. "You turned our neighborhood into your personal ATM. You terrorized families and used law enforcement like attack dogs. The biggest crime wasn't the money you stole. It wasn't even the fake violations or threats. It was destroying the trust that holds communities together. But trust can be rebuilt when good people work together." Rodriguez stepped forward, holding what looked like an official sentencing order. "Brenda Kensington, federal court sentences. You to 8 years in prison, full restitution to victims, and a lifetime ban from any HOA role." Thunderous applause shook the room, as federal marshals escorted her out past the cameras, past the neighbors she'd targeted, past the justice she'd dodged for years. Her lawyer whispered something in her ear. She turned back one last time to look at me. I smiled and waved. Justice, as they say, is best served with prison time. 6 months later, I stood in my driveway watching a moving truck leave Brenda's old house. The new owners, a young couple with twin toddlers, waved from their porch as their kids' laughter filled a space that had been silent too long. The legal fallout went exactly as Detective Rodriguez predicted. Brenda served 18 months. Before being released on probation, paid full restitution to victims in all 4 states, lost her Mercedes, sold off her designer lifestyle, and last I heard, was working in a Tucson call center under financial monitoring. But the real story was what came after. Our group of fraud victims became the Willowbrook Community Coalition, the first resident-funded HOA oversight committee in Pima County with independent audits and legal compliant enforcement procedures. Bob Richardson turned out to be a born organizer. He created a checklist for verifying legitimate HOA actions, now called the Richardson Protocol, preventing over $50,000 in fraud statewide. Janet began hosting monthly welcome events for new neighbors, where rights are explained instead of threats being issued. Other neighborhoods copied the idea. Lisa Santos now runs the kids program, where last month's talent show drew 93 participants and raised $2,400 for school programs. Our neighborhood went from fearful to connected. Doris Fleming, once manipulated into filing false complaints, became our historian and started a community garden. The Willowbrook Community Fund, seeded with recovered fraud money, has given trade school scholarships, helped families with medical bills, and funded an annual block party that's become legendary. My business, Reliable Climate Repair, grew 40% from neighbor referrals. I hired 2 employees, bought another truck, and park it proudly in my driveway without fear of bogus violations. On the personal side, Janet's sister Carol moved to Phoenix, and we've been dating for 8 months. She loves telling people we met while prosecuting a federal criminal. Media coverage even reached lawmakers, leading to the Willowbrook Act, which now requires fraud prevention in HOA management and gives residents stronger protections. The best part came last week when a man in Flagstaff called. His HOA president was running the same scam Brenda had, but he'd found our story online. "I've documented everything," he told me. "Just called the FBI. Thought you'd want to know your story stopped another fraud." That's when it hit me. We didn't just stop one person. We built a blueprint for communities to defend themselves. Now, when I come home, the scent of desert sage mixed with barbecue smoke doesn't bring back bad memories. It smells like home. My phone buzzes. Bob reminding me about tonight's meeting on the new playground proposal, plus Channel 12 wanting a follow-up on the Willowbrook model spreading to other states. I'm ready for both. If you've survived your own HOA nightmare, share it in the comments. You never know who your story might help. And hit subscribe, because next week I'll tell you about the time our new HOA president tried to embezzle the pool renovation fund, and learned why you never mess with a community that's been through federal court together. Trust me, that story's even wilder than this one. From all of us here at HOA Stories, thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more HOA drama.